What is the status of tuna conservation? That's going to be the focus on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, especially when it comes to sustainable fisheries. On the podcast today, my guest, Dr. Gala Moreno from the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation, is here to talk about fish aggregation devices and how they've improved over time to actually become a data storing and a capability of learning more about oceanography on the high seas, and to be able to even detect which species is below that fish aggregation devices. We're going to talk about what FADs are and how they play a role in conserving tuna fish in commercial fishing on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. If you want to know more about, like, hey, is this tuna in my poke bowl sustainable? Like, is it caught sustainably? Is it something that I should be eating, or is it something that I shouldn't be eating? Like, what constitutes as sustainable when we talk about tuna commercial fishing? And you've heard probably a lot of different things about how tuna are caught. We've heard in the past how, tuna are caught with dolphins, so that there's sometimes dolphins that die within the tuna fishing industry. And should you be eating tuna based on that? Like, we don't know a lot of the times. It gets really confusing. Dr. Gala Moreno talks about some of the advances in conservation that have been done through the fishing industry. And the organization that she works for, the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation, works with a variety of different fleets across the world to look at tuna and how tuna are fished and how they can improve not only the efficiency of catching tuna, but catching the actual species that they want and being able to distinguish them that are below the surface. Like, when you get a fish aggregation device, it brings in fish from all over. A lot of tuna are coming in. So what species of tuna are you going to fish for at that point? Before the information that we talked to Gala about on this episode, you would just put a purse seine net in, grab it, and grab whatever's out there. Now you can actually distinguish how much of a percentage of a certain species is there. So if one needs to be protected more than others, then you can actually go and catch the others and leave the protected ones out, and you can protect them more. So a lot of cool research that we talk about in this episode. So without further ado, here is Dr. Gala Moreno from the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation talking about fish aggregation devices and the data that comes with it, and is the conservation of tuna. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Gala, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about sustainable seafood?
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you, Andrew.
You bet. I'm excited to have you on. This is going to be a lot of fun. This is something that we don't get to talk about all the time, is sustainable seafood and fishing and sustainable practices in fishing, especially around fish aggregation devices. It's something that is known within the seafood industry and the fishing industry, but it's not something we talk about publicly a lot. And I feel as though some of my audience members, even me, I don't know if I have a full understanding of fish aggregation devices. I haven't worked with them a lot. So we're going to talk a lot about that and how it affects fisheries and how we can do better with FADs and fish aggregation devices. And I'm looking forward to doing all that on this episode. But before we do, Gala, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Gala Moreno, and I'm senior scientist with International Seafood Sustainability Foundation. We call it ISSF. And I just started working with tuna fleets and fish aggregating devices in my PhD. Mm-hmm. I did it 20 years ago or so. And since then, I've been working in all the oceans, the 3 tropical oceans, with fleets, with local scientists, to reduce the impact of fishing with fish aggregating devices. Mm-hmm. Most of my research focus on this. But of course, I work also in other tuna fleets when needed.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about tuna fleets, and we'll get into more of this later on, it is such a broad scope when we talk about tuna fleets. I think we hear about it a lot in the public. We don't really get how vast they are and where they work, how many there are. It's quite astonishing to hear, and when we're going to hear from it in a bit when we chat more about it. But I always feel like when we hear about a fleet, it is a fleet. It literally is, like, hundreds of boats, and there are different fleets all over the world, and it's hard to keep track of all of them,
Sure.
which I think is one of the problems. But it's definitely interesting, and probably working with those fleets, you probably get a lot of hands-on experience, especially through a PhD, which I think it's amazing. But let's just talk about how you got to where you are. Learn a little bit more about you. What got you interested in becoming in a position where you are today? Like, how did that happen? Were you interested in the ocean when you were younger? Did you live by the ocean? How did that all come to be?
So, okay. Well, it's a mix of influences. And well, my family, we live in the Basque Country. We are come from the Basque Country, and this is in the north of Spain. And
Okay.
this region has a very strong maritime tradition and fishing tradition. So
Okay.
I've been always surrounded by the sea and the love for the sea. And by that time, when I was a kid, they were not influencers, no internet, no mobile phones.
That's
And
right.
so my influencer was my neighbor. He was biologist and he
Okay.
showed me many documentaries, and I was fascinated with all these documentaries. So I've been surrounded by the sea, and then so I had very clear that I wanted to study marine science. And then at the university, I had a very good teacher on fisheries management,
Mm-hmm.
and he motivated me a lot to pursue that career. So it was quite easy.
I can imagine. Yeah, having a neighbor that's a biologist, that's got to be. You don't get that
Yeah,
often. Depending on
yeah,
where you live, but having that maritime feeling, living by the coast, and you probably had a lot. There's probably a fishing community. I'm sure there's biologists that are there that are working there. So I think that's really great. You've had a lot of mentors, as you mentioned. What was the best advice that you received from those that really made you be like, no, this is what I want to do?
well, I think that the best advice you can receive from any mentor or even your family or any is pursue what you like, do what you feel
Yeah.
is your interest. Don't worry about the future, just follow what you love. So I think many of the teachers, they encourage me to do and of course I think that you are good when you like something,
Yeah.
you're good at that.
For sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the passion definitely follows, especially when you talk about marine biology, fisheries management. It's such a big aspect of it. I think it's different. And you could probably say the same thing, or you could tell me if you feel the same way in Europe. But like when you become a marine biologist, it's more than just a job. It really
Yeah.
is a passion. And you'll find like a lot of biologists willing to work for free, which is nuts.
Yes,
Like you look
yes,
at any other industry, like, what do you mean you'd work for free? Like, yeah, I would do this for free.
yeah, yeah,
Because you enjoy like the ocean, like you're on boats, whether it's a fishing boat or a research boat or whatever that might be. You get to be on these boats and you get to like see the ocean and like dolphins bow riding on your along your ship, and you get to see these tuna fish that are massive and they're just gorgeous, and it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't think people understand outside of being biologists, whether it's wildlife biology or marine biology, that it really is something that I don't know about you. Like, obviously I want to retire and I want to enjoy myself, but I can't see myself stop doing marine biology in retirement. I feel like that would become my
yeah,
hobby. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's what it
yeah,
is. I've never
yeah,
thought about retiring and not doing that. It's never
yeah,
never
yeah,
happened. Maybe when I get older, I don't know, but I'm almost there. So I'm not too far off. So about 20 years away. So we'll see how I feel then, but you never know. But I think it's really interesting to get to that point. But fisheries management is not something that when you're younger, you're like, I want to be involved in fisheries and I want to be a fisheries manager. A lot of times it's like, I want to work with dolphins or I want to work with sharks. But as you got closer and you had that professor, fisheries manager, what was it about fisheries management that got you to be like, yeah, this is where my passion lies, this is where I want to follow? Because it's not an easy thing to do, right?
no, it's quite complex and involves many actors, and
Mm-hmm.
it's especially with tuna, that is a migratory species, worldwide
Yeah.
distribution. So it's not easy. But for me, what's the path was quite natural, because as soon as I finished my PhD, I went on board a purseiner
Okay.
as a scientific observer in the Indian Ocean, and so I really understood at sea, the all the implications of how fishers behave, strategies, fishing. And then I was studying tuna behavior, but I also studied fisher behavior while I was at sea. So once I finished my PhD, I had quite clear that I wanted to improve fisheries management and taking into account fishers and their knowledge. So it was quite evident for me. That was the way.
That's awesome. I've always had a great opportunity to be on fishing boats and meet fishers, and I love the culture. I love the way they act. Like everybody's unique every time you go on a different ship and you see it. But as a fisheries observer, I've seen, I've never been on as a fisheries observer. I've been on as a marine mammal observer, but never a fisheries observer. So I felt it a little bit. And there are things like it's really interesting because you get a lot of great experience as a fisheries biologist because you get to see all these different fish. You get to see how it's done. You can see how quickly it happens. When the fish come aboard, you have to identify them and measure them and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of contention when you're an observer on a fishing boat, because some of the crew may not like you being there because you're there as a regulatory. Were you there as a research capacity or as more of a regulatory capacity?
I've been as both research
Both.
capacity.
Okay.
Yes, I've been researching and also following compliance.
Gotcha. So how was that different when you for both the research as well as the compliance for you when you were in there? Like, do you find that there was more of there was more of contention, like more of conflict when you were on as compliance rather than the research?
In my case, I can say that perhaps in the beginning, when you arrive at the vessel,
right,
it's like the first impression. When you go for compliance, it can be harder in the beginning to be respected by the crew.
Yes, gotcha.
But if you have the tools, I mean the emotional skills and the knowledge, you can be. I mean, for me, I can distinguish when I was on board for research or for compliance, just in the beginning. But when you set the rules, I mean, is when, okay, I'm here.
Yeah.
And of course, sometimes there are some moments in which, in the beginning, they try to, how do you say, see what is your opinion about things. And in the beginning, there is they are testing you. But
right.
If you pass the test, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally get that. I can see that because it's also from a research perspective. A lot of these fishers, doesn't matter anybody on the crew what their role is, they're generally interested in what you do. From a research perspective, like they're interested in where the data goes, how it's done, the trends. I mean, a lot of the times they know the trends more than we do, just from what they've seen and how long it takes to catch and whether they're catching more or less. They see that happen. They can come up with different reasons why. Some of them are scientific, some of them are a little folklore and so forth. But it's really interesting to interact with them. It's from a perspective of being on a ship. I've had that perspective, but being on a ship as a woman is a lot different, right? It's there's certain concessions like during on the ship because you have to have your own room and stuff. Like I've been bunking with 4 other guys in one cabin and stuff like that. What's it like as a woman to go on one of these ships? Can it be intimidating at times? Do you find that the crew it might be nicer to you? Like how's that different?
Well, it highly depends on the crew.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like when you go to a research team and they can be very different.
Right.
I have not had any issue. I've been always, I can tell you, in Spanish vessels, I never had any issue because of being a woman. But I know that
being a scientist.
But I know that sometimes women have issue. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
has not been my case on board
Mm-hmm.
vessels. I was respected, and I had, I mean, no problem
That's good.
with them.
Yeah.
But I know that it's happened. Sometimes it's hard for women to go on board. I mean, it's when you, for instance, in a purseiner, you can be surrounded by 28 men
Mm-hmm.
working. So, yeah. But I think I'm quite used to be surrounded by men in
Because
my
yeah, in your
in my
field.
work. I mean,
Yeah.
in science, when I started with acoustics or
Mm-hmm.
sonar technology, I was surrounded by men also.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's especially in our generation too. When you as you come up, there were a lot more men in the field, especially in fishing. It's more of a predominantly male sort of field. We're starting to see a lot more female scientists come through. A lot more. I mean, it's been happening for 20 years ago. It was starting to happen, and we're starting to see that more and more and more. What advice would you give them if they want to be a fisheries observer, whether it be for compliance or whether it be for research? What advice would you give a lot of these young scientists that want to get some experience, and fisheries observer is a good way to get that experience?
Well, I'm sure for women, I'm sure it's a really good experience for for them, also for the crews to
Mm-hmm.
have women on board.
Yeah, true.
And well, I would say that my advice is to go for it. I mean, it's the same advice
Say to
I would
anybody.
give for anybody,
Yeah.
or especially women in science,
Mm-hmm.
because too often women think that, oh, I don't deserve this. I'm not gonna measure up on this
Right.
position. I'm not gonna go on board because I fear that I don't know. So I think they should go for it, even if they think they are not ready.
Mm-hmm.
They
You're
should
ready.
go.
Yeah.
Yes, you're
Yeah.
ready.
You have the degree.
Yeah,
You have the degree. You've done the schooling. You've done the IDs.
yeah,
And you learn quickly on those boats too, right? You
yeah,
learn very
yeah.
quickly.
Very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Now let's talk about ISSF. You've been there almost a decade,
Yeah,
from what I've seen in my research of you. Uh,
yeah.
how how did that all start, like working with ISSF? Was that out of your PhD, or had you worked in other places before?
I was before in another research institute in Spain called ASTI,
Okay.
but I was already working for ISSF in some specific issues with
Gotcha.
fishers and research. So in the end, I ended up in ISSF 10 years ago, yes. But
That's awesome.
mostly I continue doing same topics, same
Right.
research. But because ISSF works globally, now, then before I was more focused on Spanish fleets,
Right.
and now I work globally.
Okay. What's that like, the change from going just in Spain to working globally? What are
Well,
what's the fun part of it, and what are the challenges of it?
well, uh, for me it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the issue of having calls very late at night.
Oh yeah.
Today,
Different time zones. Yeah.
said this is the practical issue. Sometimes I have to work with New Caledonia or Hawaii,
Right.
and this is very late for me. Then for me, the adventure of working globally is very good because I love meeting people, working
Mm-hmm.
with people, and learning from them, exchanging ideas. So when you visit so many fleets, so many people, so many cultures, there's a lot of diversity, and I love it. I like it.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
imagine. It must be a lot different to go from just sort of in country and then globally, and to see how things are done in different areas of the world with the same type of, maybe not the same type of species, but the same type of fish, and to be able to see how that's changed culturally and how that's changed from even from a logistics point of view. So I think
Mhm.
that's That's really interesting. Now, your work, you said you work with a lot of fleets. Can you talk about what that entails when you work with a lot of fleets?
Well, I'm mainly working with tropical tuna purseine fleets.
Okay.
This is a specific fishing gear, although I've been working also with pole and line fleets.
Okay.
But I've been working with mainly industrial fish, those that rely a lot on the use of fish aggregating devices.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I work with Ecuadorian fleets, Colombian, Papua New Guinea,
Okay.
Ghana, Philippines. So I work with very different cultures,
Right.
strategies. Some are more attached to traditions. So
Mm-hmm.
you learn. You have
Yeah.
always something to learn and also something to share, because when you work globally, you can. It's like a cross-pollination,
Pollination. Yeah. Yeah.
cross-pollination
Yeah.
of the ideas you have. So perhaps something that is working in Ecuador, or some
Yeah.
fisher tell you, see, I'm using this practice and it works for sharks or whatever. You can go to Philippines and share this idea. So it's really nice to work globally.
I can imagine. Yeah. Now, you mentioned a lot of them use purse seine nets, right? Can you talk about what that is for the audience, to like what the device is, like what that fishing gear is?
The fish aggregating device?
No, sorry, the purse seine nets.
The purseine, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Purseine is a fishing gear which use a fishing net that encircles the fish.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
they deploy the net and then they encircle the fish with the net and they close it on the bottom. It is the purser, and they retrieve they hold the net.
The whole net. So it almost becomes like it's almost like a net where they come up and they're all at the bottom of the net as they bring it up. Let's talk. So we have that. That's how they catch them. So they encircle them, they bring them up, and that's how they catch them. Let's talk about fish aggregation devices. Can you just talk about what that is? Like, just define it for the audience, and then we can go into the different ones that they have.
Okay. So fish aggregating devices are floating objects, human-made floating objects. So they are typically a floating structure that has two components. One is the surface component, which is typically a raft.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has a tail that can reach up to 50 meters, depending on the ocean, but let's say an average of 50 meters. And these are used with a geolocating buoy. So the fishing strategy is that fishers, they deploy this floating structure at sea with a geolocating buoy
Mm-hmm.
that nowadays provide an estimate of the biomass beneath the fat.
Mm-hmm.
So they deploy it and leave it adrift for a couple of weeks or a month. And once they think or they see in the echosonders that tuna is around their floating object, they go and catch it.
Okay.
So this is the strategy and the structure of the fish aggregating device.
Now, there are different devices, though, right? And it's all based on what works in different parts of the world and things like that. Are there hundreds of different devices, or are they pretty much the same? Like how different are they when you start, like, say, when you look at a fish aggregating device that's used in Hawaii compared to like the Philippines? Are they similar or are they different, or how does that work?
Well, in terms of drifting fats,
Mm-hmm.
they are quite similar. Sometimes we can say that they can vary in the depth, the reach, in the raft they use. Usually, typically it's bamboo, but in some countries they use other materials or just purseine corks as flotation. But for instance, then we have anchor fats. Those anchor fats are used by some artisanal fleets, mostly especially in the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean. You can find thousands of them, and then the structure is different. They have being made of bamboo initially, but they are using more plastic now.
Okay. Okay. Are these FADs, are they retrieved after they're used, or do they just leave them out there?
When they set,
Mm-hmm.
when they conduct a fishing set on the fat, they usually retrieve it if
Mm-hmm.
the fat is drifting towards outside the fishing zone or towards an area that it's not productive, or they think there is not going to be a irrigation anymore. They retrieve it. The issue is that some fats end up lost or abandoned because they drift outside the fishing zone. I mean,
Mm.
the time from the deployment to the visit,
Mm-hmm.
there like 2 weeks or 1 month, and in this month, fats can drift outside or
Right.
can
You just never know.
happen.
It's the ocean. You never know
Yeah,
sometimes, right, where
yeah,
they
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Are there like
Yes,
GPS units attached to them, or satellite GPS units that they can
it's
retrieve
a
them?
buoy
Yeah.
buoy with
Okay.
satellite connection. Equipped with an ecosonder, which provides rough estimates
Gotcha.
of biomass.
But not all of them. Like that's got to be expensive to put together, like each of these fads to have. Can some tuna fleets afford them and others not, or like how does that work?
Nowadays, almost every fad has a buoy with an ecosonder.
Okay.
It's more expensive, but
Right.
it's more expensive to travel, for instance, 4 days to a fad, to a
Right.
fish aggregating device, consuming fuel and time, and to find that there is nothing there.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it
that's
can,
true.
the echo sounder, in fact it has been a really good. I mean, it has been an incredible improvement on the way fats are
Hmm.
fished, because now fishers can plan their strategy before going at sea, just
Right.
looking at biomasses.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. So from a fisheries perspective, like if I'm a fisher, I want these fish aggregation devices. Like these are good for me because they attract the fish. Then I know that they're going to be there, especially now with the data that I have. There's more likely a chance that they're going to be there. I can go out there when there's stuff out there. But from a fisheries management perspective, like from the ecology side or from the conservation side, are fads a good thing or are they not a good thing? Like, how do we approach it, even from the ISSF? Right, you guys are there for sustainability. Is using a fad part of sustain? Like, is it considered sustainable to use that? Like, are we like we're getting more efficient by taking the fish, but is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like from a conservation perspective.
Well, the first thing is that um, any fishing gear comes with an impact. So
Right.
if
It's
we want
attractive.
to
Yeah.
fish, we need to accept a level of impact, or
Yes.
assume there's going to be an impact. Um, for sure, fats are, some people think are bad,
Mm-hmm.
and I have listened to many people saying fats are bad. If we build our opinion based on science and we look at data, then we can say that fats are not bad,
Right.
and that I think, of course, there are things to improve, but fats can be, and this is entirely possible. I mean, we have a look 10 years ago. There was 20 years ago, there was nothing on the fats management, and now we have improved a lot.
Mm.
So if we have a look to data, I would say fats are not bad, but of course there is an impact of using fats.
Right. Right. When you work with the fishing like fleet on fads and the research around fads and making sure that it's sustainable, it's properly done, uh, what's are they jumping in with you and being, okay, let's make sure this is done as we want to look at the compromise, but we also want to make sure we're catching the right amount of fish, but we also don't want to have too much of an impact. Like you said, there's always an impact, but we don't want to have too much of an impact. When you work with those, like I know ISSF have like a really good relationship with the fishing fleet. So how do you approach that? Saying like, yeah, we want to just see, how these fads work, and are they good for the conservation of fish or not good for the conservation of fish? How do they react to that?
No, it's, I mean, we always work with fishes from the first step of our research. So it's
Right.
not that I go with a new fat
Yeah.
design and say, you have to try this. No,
Yeah.
no, our approach in ISSF is that we try to find a solution with them.
Mm.
So, for instance, it was a huge challenge to move towards non-entangling fats, which are
Okay.
fats that don't have any netting in their construction.
Okay.
So, because the conventional fats or traditional fat used before, they had fishing nets, and this was creating ghost fishing because marine fauna was entangling in fat structures. So we had this challenge of moving towards fats without knitting,
Mm-hmm.
and we work with fishers from the beginning. We choose some fishers that we know and that we trust, and they trust us. So we've been building for
That
years
relationship.
a relationship, which is really
Yeah.
important. And then also we know who to ask because fishers are like scientists. They have an expertise. I mean, if you go to a doctor because you have a headache, you go to a specialist. So with fishers, it's the same. You
Yeah.
go to someone that is a specialist in what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have very clear the people we involve, which is really, we have a method for that. And from then we start finding the solution with them, and that's the way we work.
Right.
But the challenge here is that we are working in a worldwide. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the global reach is the challenge. So for that, we've been working, doing a skippers workshop everywhere, showing what other fishes are doing and it works, and then making trials with them and
Yeah.
all this.
Well, I mean, I feel as though, fishers and scientists are very similar. They experiment, right? And that's how they do it
Yeah.
because they have to figure out ways. Fishers are working out on an ocean that can be very calm at times, but most of the time it's not as calm and it's a little chaotic. And there are times you have to. I have a feeling a lot of the fish aggregation devices have developed the way they develop in certain parts of the world because of the environment that they're surrounded by. They have to be durable. They have to, make sure that they're still there when they go out and get them. And in certain areas, like in the Pacific, it could be very rough. Any ocean could be extremely rough, and you have to make sure that it works there. And so I'm sure a lot of the fads have been rigged that way so that they're just there when you get them, and so it's kind of interesting to see the different stages of FADs, and I'm sure they've gotten a lot better, not only from a conservation standpoint but from an efficiency standpoint, as we talked about with the data and having the machinery and the data that you can get from there. And so I think that's really interesting. And obviously from a scientific point of view, as you and I know, both being scientists, it's all experimentation, right? This is how we work with things, and sometimes it works out in our favor, and sometimes it doesn't work out in our favor. But let's talk about some of the research that you've done specifically on. Can you talk about one of the projects that you've worked on recently that we could talk about in terms of looking at FADs and how it impacts the environment?
Yeah. I've been working mainly lastly in three topics. One is biodegradable fat. You can choose one
Oh,
of them.
yeah, yeah,
One,
yeah.
one is the move towards biodegradable fats, and this is because those fats that end up lost or abandoned, they can cause damage on coral reefs or benthic ecosystems. So we design a fat that is made of organic materials.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been also working with acoustic discrimination of tropical tuna species, and this has been this is still we are working on it, and this is a huge effort we've done so
Okay.
that
Yeah.
fishers can have a better estimate of what they have in the water before they set the fishing net. So this is to fish more selectively.
So you're talking about actually detecting the species based on the sound of the fish, like the acoustics of the fish. So this is like what we do a lot with marine mammals, but marine mammals emit a noise, but you can hear their calls, and a lot of times you can tell which whale or whatever is there. Now you're talking about being able to distinguish between the different species. How is that happening?
Yeah,
I'm very curious.
yeah. It can happen, and we use a different what in fish aggregating devices. We have three main species, tropical tuna species, and those are skipjack, yellowfin, and big eye.
Right.
And we are using a difference in their morphology because the skipjack, they don't have swim bladder.
Oh, okay. I did not
And
know that.
big eye tuna and yellowfin tuna, they do have the swim bladder. And the swim
Okay.
bladder is a balloon that fish
Yep.
have inside, and it's filled with air.
Mm-hmm.
And this balloon, or the swim bladder, is what the sounds reflect very strongly. So when you use a given frequency, if you touch a fish with a swim bladder, the echo, the backscatter of this echo is going to be a lot more stronger than those that don't have swim bladder. So at fish aggregating devices, if we encounter, for instance, a skipjack and big eye,
Yeah.
we know that the frequency response of the two species is going to be different. And this
Right.
is how we work with acoustics.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Now,
Yes.
between sorry, which were the ones with the swim bladders? The big eye and the skipjack? Is that what it is?
Yes, they do have swim bladder.
So, can you detect between those two species based on do they reflect back different like backscatter just based on their morphology?
It's more difficult.
Okay, yeah. So it's a little bit
The
you have to fine tune it a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's more difficult, but what we found out is that the yellowfin, their frequency response is flat. So, for
Right.
instance, if you use a low frequency and a high frequency, the behavior of the response is going to be quite flat. But if
Gotcha.
you use with a big eye a low frequency and a high frequency, you will have a stronger response in low frequency.
Okay.
So what you need to discriminate the species is use at the same time a low and a high frequency. And this is what we are working with buoy manufacturers and ecosonder buoys manufacturers to see if they can introduce this knowledge in their buoys.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, that would be phenomenal. Now, let's talk about from an application standpoint. Obviously, the science is cool on this. Like, it's I'm geeking out just listening to this. Like, this is a lot of fun. But when we talk about the application for fishers, right? So you have this instrument, the acoustic instrument on the buoy, and then it is able to detect what's there and then bring it back to land or to the ship if that's close by. From an application standpoint, are there certain times of the year where you can catch certain types of species? Is that like, are they seasonal and or they can only catch, like, say, big eye or yellowfin or skipjack at certain times of the year?
In general, they share, the three species or two species are present simultaneously at FAS.
Okay.
Of course, you can have different species composition, and this can vary depending on the local presence of the different species. But in general, you can find two or three species at the same time. So the challenge is the challenge to fish, for instance, only the species that it's in healthy condition, let's say. This is can be done through acoustics, because otherwise the fishers will encircle always the three species at first.
Right.
So the idea behind using this acoustic is that fishers, they have on the bridge a screen with all the fats they have at sea. So if they have a percentage of the species present at each FAD, they can decide to avoid areas with a lot of big eye if big eye needs to be protected in that ocean, or
Gotcha.
yellowfin if yellowfin needs to be protected in that ocean. So the idea is that they can be more efficient in taking sustainable decisions.
Yeah. So it's not just a guess where you just throw the net in because you know that there's fish there, and then you just bring it up, and then whatever you catch, you catch. If there's certain species that may not be doing well that year or that season, then they can just be like, okay, well, we're going to go where there's, species that are doing better, and we're going to leave that for a little bit because we've been asked to leave that for a little bit. But we still are able to retain the same amount of yield of a different type of species, knowing that it'll be more sustainable. So they can make in the field decisions that are more sustainable just right off the bat, just by having better data and science around that. That is awesome. That is so cool.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because I mean, there's no guesswork anymore, and it's not as if, well, we just put the net in, we didn't know what was in there, we just knew that there were fish there. We knew it was tuna, but we didn't know which species it was. What a find. That is so cool. Now, is this being like, so this is, where are we in terms of like the deployment of this? Now we're just trying to figure out if we can put it on the buoys and how to fasten it on the buoys?
Well, some of the manufacturers are already working with 2 frequencies, but here there are many improvements to introduce, because you can improve your hardware. For instance, having a dual beam transducer. So when the echo comes, you know where it comes from in the beam. So there are some hardware improvements, and then there is the improvement of the how to translate the decibels, also the electric signal, into biomass. So we are working in these 2 things together with manufacturers, and in fact we are now in like 3 projects with manufacturers, the 3 manufacturers existing nowadays, to improve their hardware and interpretation of the signals. Yes.
Unreal. And just even to think about this, like from a conservation standpoint, this is huge. I mean, tuna are in trouble. We know that, like with the amount of fishing that's been done in the past, and just not being able to distinguish which fish are down there. And a lot of the times we blame fishers and we blame the industry, and to a certain degree it can be, but if they don't know what species are underwater, which is very difficult to tell, then it's difficult to manage that. Now we're at we're on the precipice of being able to deploy these, on buoy systems on these FADs, and just being like, okay, we've actually been able to protect certain species at certain times of the year, at certain, when they're maybe a little bit lower, and then we can focus in on other species, and that just brings fisheries management to a different level, but it also brings fishing to a different level. They don't have to just be indiscriminate. They can discriminate on the types of species that they can capture. That's awesome. That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
What a win. What a great win. How does that, like when you see that, like how did that whole idea come together? Like, was that a number of you at ISSF? Was that somebody, like one of your partners working on it? Like where did the idea come from?
Well, the idea came from an old project when I was doing my PhD.
Yeah.
Because I was using tuna to study tuna behavior. I was using ecosonders with IRD. It's a French institute.
Okay.
And we were using different frequencies, and some French acousticians already were working on the idea of this discrimination from an IRD. And so I continue after my PhD on this line. It was it has been a lot of work, because we knew nothing about the acoustic signal of tropical tunas. So we started from almost nothing. So we had to spend a long time at sea and taking sampling, having data, and working a lot. And especially these last years, we've been working with ASTI, which is the Spanish Institute of Research.
Yeah.
And the acousticians there are working on this with ISSF.
That is phenomenal. That is so cool.
And Andrew, it's not just fishing selectively, but scientists, we are all very interested in having this data for research, because imagine if you have all the data from the fats and the numbers of species and individuals behind the fat, you can understand many different things about fish aggregating devices and even define new measures.
Well, it's all not you just, but you just learn more about the ocean in general. You have all these fads deployed around the world. I know what they're for. They're for to extract fish, but it's also, as you put more and more data systems on there, you have this network of data acquisition from an oceanography standpoint. That's amazing. Probably especially in like areas where I assume that a lot of these are in the high seas. And you're just like, we don't know much about the high seas. To have this data acquisition there and to have that relationship with fishers, that's what it really comes down to say, hey, like, can we actually access some of that data so we can understand it better? Yeah. And I think that really goes towards building that relationship with the fishing fleet, because that could have just been proprietary information. Now they're sharing it. You can make these assumptions and hypotheses and test them and experiment with them and just be like, okay, like now we can figure out that there's different frequencies for swim bladders and some fish don't have them, so that we can be able to tell between species and make it better for conservation purposes, which is a win-win for everybody from the fishing fleet to the scientists to the world. I mean, I think that's really great. I love that. I'm so glad you told me about that project. I think that's great. The question I should ask about that, though, is when you work with different fleets around the world, are they all trying to are they all trying to be more conservation friendly? Like, do they want to be more conservation friendly? Do they want to work with this type of data that you have and try and experiment? Are they open to that type of thing?
Well, there is diversity on that. I mean, some fleets are really proactive.
Yeah.
And they and they want, and also the ship owner, for instance, a big company, if the ship owners have a policy to be sustainable, this is great and it's easy. But then you have other fleets that they don't believe they need to improve. That's happening, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So I think it takes time, but it's improving. So it's a matter of sharing with them. You see, this is a biodegradable fat, and it works as well as the conventional fat, and this fleet is using, and another fleet is using it, and it works. Yeah. So it takes more time with those fleets. But the good thing is that the fleets that are doing well and are making a big effort to improve sustainability with fats, they push the others. They are pushing the others because nobody wants to fall behind.
Right. True.
And so when fishers see, oh, look, they are using this, we should move. Then they ask and start contacting us and things. Yeah. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes takes longer. It depends on the fleet.
But then again, it goes towards building the relationship with other fleets, and then those fleets are in discussion with each other as well, and that putting them added pressure, being like, hey, this actually works out well, and having that almost like reference or referral from another fleet to say, no, like the ISSF is really great, they work really well, and they're here for us as well as conservation. So I think that bodes well. Now, one of the things, ISSF and the work that you're doing are sometimes, like as we just talked about, is on the cusp of, new technology and innovation. And obviously, you share that with the fleets and you share that with the fleets all over the world. But as a scientist, you want to be able to share that within the scientific community, especially with early career scientists. Do you ever teach students as well and share this with students, like this type of work, and get them like excited about the new technology that's out? Yeah,
sure. I mean, not now because I'm now focused on research, but before I was teaching. Sometimes I gave masters and things like this. Yeah. And working with young people. Yes.
Nice. And how do you find, like, when so you were actually like like on a committees for graduate students. So if they did, I don't know how it's done in Europe when you do your graduate work, but do you defend your thesis at the end? Is that
yes.
So you have a committee, and so you're on the committees. Yes. That's awesome. And so are you still in, like, does the ISSF still have relationships with the universities?
Sure.
Yeah.
We are always. I've been in juries many times, and we continue writing. I mean, science is our. I mean, many times I have a invitation to be jury or to be the mentor for a work for a student.
Yeah.
We are public. We share. An important part of our work is not just research, but communication with scientists, writing peer-reviewed papers, attending conferences, giving conferences. And so we try to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Which is hard. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah. For instance, now next month I'm visiting China.
Oh, nice.
And I will visit when I have a workshop on biodegradable fats together with the Pacific community, which is the science provider for the WCPFC.
Okay.
And we have in that trip, we are going to do everything. I mean, we are going to do a workshop with fishers, with manufacturers to teach them how to do a biodegradable fat, what tuna reformers are requiring, the need for fleets, what is working, everything with these companies. Then we are going to look for organic materials in China so that they can supply the fleets in the Western Pacific. And then we are visiting the university in Shanghai for lectures. So it's like we have everything there.
That's amazing to be able to provide that, almost those services and to be able to share that information across different, scientists, the public, and so forth. I think that's really great. And for you to come on here and spend your time, busy time with us and be able to share the research that you have with us and the work that you do is really amazing. So Gala, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. Love to have you back on and talk more about the research that you're doing and dive deeper into it.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Andrew. Thank you, Gala, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you. I love being able to have people on that are able to explain a lot of the things that we may or may not know that goes on in the fishing industry. This really is important to learning more about the ocean and being more aware of how things are caught and what is good and what is bad from a perception from a consumer, right? I want to know that when I go to buy seafood, if I go buy like a tuna poke bowl, I'm going to Hawaii in a few weeks, and I want to make sure that I get the right poke bowl. I want to make sure that I'm catching something that's sustainably caught, if it is sustainably caught. And that's the decision that we have to make. But the only way we can make that decision is based on data and based on science. And that's what the International Seafood Sustainability Foundation does. It helps us understand more about what's happening in the tuna fleets across the world and being able to make that decision for ourselves. So I really appreciate Gala coming on. We're going to put all the links to the ISSF on here in the show notes, and you can be able to access that. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns about this episode, please feel free to contact me at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. Just DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. And of course, you can subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you prefer to watch this on YouTube. And of course, you can watch this on Spotify. You can listen to it on Spotify and listen to it on Apple Podcasts, as well as your other favorite Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast apps. We're everywhere. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. And thank Gala as well. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.